Percival died after I began to get well. For years, he touched me carefully. Then I found him embracing another woman. He had chosen the body he did not have to handle gently. Now she stood in front of me, and I could hear her pulse and her horror. Only then did I look toward the trees and understand that Lord Whitlock had been waiting. If you love vengeful women, obsessive vampire lords, and satisfying not-so-happy endings, follow for more. Now, where were we? Chapter 1. The Voice Behind the Shed. The shed door was slick beneath my palm, rain black and breathing clove soap through its warped boards. A lantern guttered inside. Its light slipped through the cracks in narrow yellow cuts, showing me flattened straw, the bright curve of a hairpin, and the toe of my repaired boot sinking into mud. The old workbench scraped once against the floor. Then the man laughed, not the low, polished laugh he used when servants might hear. This one broke in his throat. I knew it. That was worse. A woman answered him with a softer sound. My sound. I locked my knees. I had fallen in public too often to do it beside that door. My breath caught, but it stayed quiet. Inside, cloth rustled. The bench gave another small complaint.
Don't,
he said. The woman murmured something I could not catch. Her voice held a pause I had used since childhood, the little waiting space that made people lean closer and believe the next words were meant only for them. I could have left before the sentence finished. I pressed my ear nearer to the wet wood. Rain ran beneath my collar. My breath snagged high in my chest, thin and useless, but I stayed. A loose hairpin lay in the straw outside the door. One rich brown strand wound around it. I bent to pick it up and nearly folded at the waist. My hand struck the boards instead. The lantern flame inside shivered. The man's voice dropped.
With her, I always have to.
The woman stopped him.
Say it plainly. Whose body feels nicer above you?
Yours, Clementine. By the gods, your body.
He breathed. My fingers spread against the door. In the wood beyond the shed, something stood where the rain made no sound. I did not turn.
Lord Whitlock.
A dark-gloved hand appeared beside my shoulder and rested against the outer frame. No footstep had warned me. His mouth came near my ear.
You called.
Chapter 2. The Flame and the Blood. The first thing I remembered of Ambrose Whitlock was not his face. It was the candle. I was 7, and the candle flame on my bedside stool leaned toward the closed window, although the winter wind pressed from the other side. Wax had made a crooked white lake around the wick. I watched it bend and thought it looked curious. Then a knuckle tapped the glass. Our cottage window had been warped before I was born. In wet weather, the lower sash swelled into its frame, and Mother had to set both hands beneath it and swear under her breath to make it move. That night, it lifted when I touched the latch. A pale man stood outside. I remember dark hair at his collar and eyes that did not catch the candlelight so much as hold it. I remember one gloved hand on the outer sill. I remember thinking he must be cold. He asked me something quietly. I answered. By morning, the words were gone. At 7, that absence competed poorly with Hester Bellamy waiting at our gate, a ribbon around my wrist, and the first red fruit from her father's garden staining my nails. People lingered near me then. Mrs. Dallow could arrive complaining of her knees and leave laughing about the time she fell into the village pond. The baker's youngest boy, who stammered before men, could tell me an entire story if I watched his hands instead of his mouth. Clementine Hollis stood at the edge of those gatherings with a basket of mended ribbons. She was warm-faced and careful, with brown hair her aunt braided too tightly. Her stitches were finer than anything sold in Alderwick, but people passed her table for louder wares. I saw her watching the baker's wife walk away without examining a single ribbon.
Call her back,
I said. Clementine frowned.
She doesn't need one. Her daughter does. The yellow one. She likes buttercups.
I tore a narrow strip from the blue cloth Mother had bought to patch my best dress and put it in Clementine's hand.
Say her name first. People stop when they hear their name kindly.
She did. The baker's wife stopped. Clementine looked at me afterward, as if I had shown her how a latch worked. That same morning, Mother found blood beneath the collar of my nightdress. I woke to her thumb pressed under my jaw, and her iron keys digging into my hip, where she had sat too quickly on the bed. Her face was square and weathered even then, though her hair held less silver. She did not cry out. Mother never spent fear where it could not buy anything.
Hold still, Noelle.
The cloth at my neck had dried stiff. 2 small wounds sat high on the left side, so close together they might have been made by a sewing fork. Tabitha Rook arrived with her tan satchel knocking against her broad leg. She planted her boots beside the bed, pushed brass spectacles up her nose, and examined my throat, my eyes, my nails, and the weak flutter under my wrist.
An animal?
Mother asked.
Not one I know.
A needle?
Twice, in exactly the same place.
Tabitha wrapped my neck in clean linen and gave Mother a bottle that smelled of bitter leaves. She did not pretend it was an answer. The fever came by afternoon. Mother told me years later that she asked what had happened at the window. I remember her hand around mine. I remember the latch shining. I remember turning my face toward it because someone beyond the glass had asked a question, and I had been rude enough to leave him waiting. My mouth began forming the answer. Mother clapped her palm over it. A shadow crossed the sealed pane. She dragged me from the bed so hard my shoulder struck the floor. Afterward, she never asked me to remember again. She washed the blood-marked collar and found the stain would not leave. She folded it into the bottom of her cedar chest beneath old winter shirts. Then she fetched hammer, nails, and an iron bar from the shed behind the cottage. The hammer blows shook the whole frame. When fear woke me after that, Mother sat beside the bed and counted beneath her breath.
1, 2, 3.
Her fingers pressed my wrist.
Count with me, Noelle.
I counted because she asked. I counted because there was comfort in discovering that a next beat came at all. By dusk, the sash had been nailed shut and the iron bar fixed across it. The candle flame continued bending into the room.
Chapter 3. Already inside, Agnes Fenwick believed the iron bar had changed something. I listened to her hammer it into place from inside Noelle's room. The child slept with fever dampening her blonde hair against her temples. Her pulse moved reluctantly beneath skin so pale the veins showed through. Agnes had laid a kitchen knife beside the candle and taken up her post in the passage beyond the bedroom door. Neither act inconvenienced me. A welcome belongs to the threshold that receives it. Wood may swell. Nails may bite. Iron may be laid across glass. None of those things unspeaks a word. Noel had lifted the latch for me and answered before anyone had taught her what a pale man outside a window might take. I did not repeat her words while she slept. I had heard too many vows weakened by repetition. Her forgotten answer was sufficient. For nearly 2 centuries, Brackenmere Manor had received rain through its western roof and foxes through the kitchen wall. I kept 3 rooms dry. I kept no servants. On the few nights I crossed Fairsoe ground, men who did not know what I was nevertheless knew the signet on my hand. Barnaby Cresswell, not yet gray at the temples, once raised a lantern toward me, saw the antique silver and lowered it again. The gesture was enough. Those years had taught me to endure almost anything except waste. I fed from Noel in measures. I counted what I took by the changes under my hand, not by appetite. Her pulse weakened. Her sleep deepened. The small body repaired what it could. I stopped before damage became death and returned when the interval was useful. Agnes counted the child's heartbeats after I left. Sometimes her fingers began where mine had been. The locks multiplied. Hester came to the step with berries and was sent home before Noel could put on her boots. An invitation to the baker's christening remained unopened beside the flower jar. Agnes shortened walks when clouds threatened and watched every flush in her daughter's face as if joy itself might be a fever. Each barrier removed a road, a witness, or a person who might have noticed the regularity of the decline. I had no need to suggest it. At the market, the Hollis girl watched Noel with the same patience I used. She watched where Noel placed her attention, how she remembered names, how she made a question feel like a gift rather than a demand. When Noel's strength began to fail, the girl stepped into the spaces she left. I let her continue. That night, Agnes slept upright outside the bedroom, one hand around her key ring. Rain touched the newly sealed window. I rested my gloved palm against the iron bar from inside the room. Noelle did not wake until my mouth was already at her throat.
Chapter 4. A Future Behind Glass. I was a grown woman before anyone kissed my palm, as if it belonged to a life beyond the cottage. Percival Montague did it in the Fairso glasshouse, beneath rain ticking against 1,000 panes. He had dark, honey-blonde hair that never stayed as carefully arranged as his position required, hazel green eyes, and the easy strength of someone whose body had never made a public enemy of him. His pale blue neckcloth was too fine for Alderwick mud. I liked loosening it.
You'll crease it,
He said.
That is the point.
He smiled and took off one pale glove. The silver cravat pin at his throat caught the dim light before he set it on the table beside us. Fairso's citrus trees were older than either of us. Their leaves made small dark screens between the paths. Behind them, I could pretend the estate had admitted me instead of merely failing to notice me. Percival kissed the center of my palm, then the pale nick across my right thumb.
You're cold.
I walked here in rain.
You should have sent word. I would have.
Come to the cottage? Mother would have barred the door before you reached the step.
He did not argue. We had built our courtship in borrowed rooms and weather, the glass house, a disused orchard wall, the strip of road where Fairso land met Brackenmere Wood. He called our secrecy protection from gossip. I never asked which of us it protected. Barnaby Cresswell's voice carried from beyond the glass house door.
Sir, household alliances are not a matter for improvisation.
Percival's hand tightened around mine.
You asked me to speak plainly.
Barnaby continued.
A poor village woman in uncertain health raises questions you cannot answer privately. Not about affection, about succession.
I felt Percival look at me through the citrus leaves. He had told Barnaby enough to be warned. He had not said my name. Footsteps approached. He kissed me as if urgency could disguise retreat. His mouth moved from mine to my throat, and his fingers found the clasp of my high collar. I let my head fall back. For a moment I stopped listening for my breath. The latch rattled. Percival pulled his cravat free and wrapped it over my bare shoulders. Then he moved me behind the citrus screen. Not beside him, behind it. Barnaby paused outside.
Sir? One moment.
The footsteps receded. Percival stood very still. Relief loosened his face before tenderness returned to it. That relief was small. It might have escaped anyone who did not make a practice of seeing what people hope to hide. I held his cravat closed over my chest.
You didn't have to hide me.
Not here.
Where then?
He reached for me.
Next Thursday. The housekeeper can leave the east passage unlatched.
That wasn't my question.
It's the answer I have tonight.
He kissed my forehead, careful again. I left while rain still silvered the panes. His cravat pin remained on the table. He did not notice until I was gone. Chapter 5, the second time he stepped back. The morning after the glass house, a rust-colored crescent marked the inside of my collar. I touched the place where Percival had kissed me. The skin was tender, but the stain had spread farther than his mouth had gone. Mother saw it while I was buttoning my dress.
You're not leaving.
I am.
You can't draw a full breath.
I can draw enough.
She planted her compact body between me and the door, keyring at her waist.
Enough for what?
I hated her most when she asked sensible questions. I waited until the next evening to bring Percival to the cottage. Mother had gone to sit with a neighbor in labor, taking her keys because habit mattered even when there was no one left to lock in. Percival looked at the iron bar over my bedroom window and asked nothing. He had always known how to leave another household's strangeness untouched, when a question might spoil a private hour. I pulled him down by his open coat.
Noelle,
Don't.
your mother could return.
She won't.
I meant your breeding.
I unfastened his shirt.
Don't decide what I can bear.
His mouth tightened. Then he kissed me. I guided his hand beneath my shift and felt his hand stop being careful. I removed my stockings and drew him onto the narrow bed. The frame complained under our combined weight. His shirt slipped from one shoulder. My high collar lay open beside us, the old rust-colored stain showing in the candlelight. He kissed my throat, then lower, and I pulled him between my knees. For a little while I noticed the bed frame under my hand, and his breath at my ear before I noticed my chest. The iron bar cast a long shadow across the floor. My fingers tightened around the bed frame. Percival's breath warmed my ear, and mine came steadily enough that I began to trust it. A fine pressure gathered beneath my breastbone. I ignored it until my chest closed, my back bowed, I could not draw breath.
Stop.
Percival stopped at once. He moved away so quickly that one foot struck the floor beyond my reach. Only one step. An involuntary thing. He corrected it almost immediately and knelt beside the bed, gathering my shift over me while I fought for breath. But I had seen his face. Not disgust. That would have been easier. Fear, yes. And beneath it, relief. He soaked a cloth at the basin and pressed it to my mouth.
Sorry.
Don't speak to me like Tabitha.
You told me to stop.
You stepped away.
His eyes closed for half a second.
I thought you were dying.
You always think I'm dying when you want me.
The bed frame splintered under my hand. A bright line opened across my palm. Percival reached for the torn stocking on the floor and wrapped it around the cut. By the time he had buttoned his shirt and tied the cloth, the bleeding had ceased. He unwound it to check. The cut had narrowed to a pale sealed line. We both stared.
Poor light,
I said. The candle stood less than a foot away. Percival retied the stocking anyway. His hands were gentle. He left one shirt button beneath the bed and sat too far from me while finishing the rest.
I'm trying not to hurt you,
he said.
You keep saying that after you already have.
The collapse kept me in bed for 3 days. On the 4th, I was meant to meet him at the estate boundary. I could not cross the cottage room without gripping the table. Mother brought broth, tucked the faded lavender gray shawl around my shoulders, and said Clementine Hollis had offered help.
No.
She mended the Wren boys' coats for half what the cloth cost.
She watches.
Everyone watches when you fall.
That isn't what I mean.
Mother set the bowl down harder than necessary.
You have a letter that needs carrying. I have work. Pride won't walk it to Fairsow.
The sealed apology lay beside my pewter locket. I had written 3 versions before finding one that did not sound grateful for being forgiven. Clementine arrived in a pale dress with embroidered cuffs, matched perfectly at both wrists. Her brown hair was pinned in regular waves. She stood at the threshold, holding her hands composed near her waist, warm and useful and already familiar. When she saw me, she let one small pause enter her smile. Mine. I nearly sent her away. Then I thought of Percival waiting, and deciding my absence proved what my body had always told him.
Only the letter,
I said. Clementine inclined her head. I placed the sealed apology in her hand myself. She held it against her chest as she crossed into my cottage. Under the blanket, I rubbed the line in my palm until the skin reddened.
Chapter 6, The Apology in Her Voice. Clementine carried Noel's apology down the Fairsow road in both hands. By then, she had already handled the pieces from which it was made. She had aired Noel's childhood dresses beside the Fenwick stove. She had folded shawls and found old berry stains in hems. She had learned which village stories Noel remembered, which names softened her voice, which private joke made Percival look down before he smiled. Clementine practiced at the cottage washstand mirror, the pause before a kind question, the small tilt of the head, the way Noel made people feel she had time for them. She did not practice everything. Her hands required no imitation. They were skilled enough to earn bread without beauty or patronage. She repaired winter coats with cloth taken from hidden seams, kept commissions in exact columns, and extended credit to families who would otherwise have watched their children shiver. She had turned Noel's childhood lesson into a trade. When her stitching did not bring enough custom, she used Noel's manners as well. I watched from the edge of the Fenwick threshold. The night before Clementine carried the letter, Percival's scent remained on Noel's skin, clove soap, rain, and the heat of a living man. I took more than the measure I had intended. Noel's pulse faltered beneath my mouth. For one instant, the interval was too long. I lifted my head and waited with my hand around her wrist. Her heart moved again. I did not take the next measure. By morning, she could not stand. Clementine went to Fairso in her place. Percival received her near the stables. She offered the sealed note and repeated a private joke in Noel's exact cadence. Then she touched the inside of his wrist where Noel had once touched him while asking why his pulse quickened before a lie. He kissed her. Then he broke away and looked at her face, then her mouth, as if he had only just seen who she was.
Leave.
Clementine left. 4 days later, she returned with mended linen requested by the housekeeper. Percival found her in the east passage. She smiled without Noel's pause that time. He looked disappointed. A week after that, she brought alterations and one reply for Noel. Percival stopped her beside the unused guest room.
Don't do that.
Do what?
You know.
Then why did you ask me back?
He had not asked her back in words. Instead, he arranged a private delivery for the following week. On her third return, Percival closed the guest room door and turned the key himself. Clementine unpinned her hair. Brown waves fell to her lower back. She removed his silver cravat pin and placed it on the table, then stepped between his knees and set his hand at her waist.
We shouldn't,
he said. She turned toward the door. He pulled her back. I remained beyond the rain-dimmed window. Their heartbeats accelerated differently. Percival's stumbled each time he looked toward the locked door, then steadied when he drew Clementine closer. Hers kept exact time until he opened the back of her dress. Later, loose hairpins lay across the carpet. His shirt cuff was fastened inside out. Noel's opened apology, refolded along its original crease, remained in his discarded coat. Percival used the private title he had once given Noel. Clementine went still.
That isn't my name.
He began to move away. She released him completely and gave him the door. He looked at it, then at her.
I know,
he said.
Say mine or let me go.
Clementine.
He chose to continue. Afterward, she gathered each hairpin from the carpet one by one. Percival did not help her. At the door, she turned back.
Next time,
She said.
say it while you're looking at me.
I left the window and took the road back to the cottage. Noelle slept through the loss she had not yet been permitted to see.
Chapter 7, The Lantern Crown. Mother told me to stay home from the lantern feast.
The square will be mud.
I own books.
You were ill yesterday.
I am ill every day. It has ceased to be news.
I wore my faded lavender gray shawl over a pearl gray dress and kept my shoulders square until we reached the lights. Paper lanterns hung from ropes across Alderwick Square, red and cream and pale green, their reflections trembling in puddles. One frame above the musicians had been reset by Clementine after damp warped its joints. 2 wren boys stood beneath it in coats she had repaired before the first frost. Her account book rested at her elbow, balanced to the last borrowed coin. Hester Bellamy crossed the square, carrying a woven crown looped with yellow and blue ribbons. She had placed it on my head twice when we were girls, back when the honor went to whoever had done most to make the feast bright. That year, every chair faced Clementine. She stood in a remade blue dress, not the same dress I had worn as a child. She was too skilled for crude copying. She had taken its shape, the fitted bodice, the soft fall at the waist, the narrow ribbon at one wrist, and rebuilt it for her healthier body in cornflower cloth. Her sleeves sat more neatly than mine ever had. The blue strip I had given her years ago had become trim at the inner cuff, visible only when she lifted her hand. Hester hesitated. Her leaf-green eyes found mine across the square, and her head tipped to one side in the old way. Shame arrived before she lowered the lantern crown onto Clementine's brown hair. People applauded. Old Mr. Wren studied his boots. The baker's wife clapped twice and stopped. The mother of a child in one of Clementine's repaired coats clapped harder. Clementine smiled and said,
You've all made more light than you think.
It was a phrase I had used while hanging lanterns 3 winters before. She placed the paws in the same place. Hester leaned toward the woman beside her. Music, boots, rain, and voices crowded the square between us.
She's not herself lately,
Hester whispered. The words struck my ear with impossible clarity. I turned before the final syllable left her mouth. Hester flinched. She was 20 paces away. I blamed wet walls, the shape of the square, and humiliation sharpening what illness had dulled. Clementine smoothed the blue skirt with both hands. My gesture. I crossed the square. The villagers nearest her shifted aside, not all of them willingly. Clementine watched me come with her hands composed at her waist.
You don't laugh like that,
I said. A few people looked away. Clementine's warm expression did not alter.
I beg your pardon?
You never laughed like that before you began coming to my house.
Noelle?
Hester murmured. Clementine glanced at her, then back to me. The glance was perfect. Brief concern, no visible satisfaction.
You taught me how people listen,
she said.
I did not teach you to put on my manners.
Color rose in her face.
You gave me a strip of cloth. I learned to sew. Was I meant to throw the lesson away?
I caught her wrist and turned the cuff until the old strip of blue showed.
Not this.
Clementine freed herself. The trim scraped my sleeve as her hand pulled away.
No,
she said.
You said I don't laugh correctly.
Someone behind me muttered that I was tired. Clementine's defense was true enough to carry the lie inside it. She had learned. She had worked. She had fed children's arms into sleeves she repaired by candlelight. She had also opened my drawers, studied my pauses, carried my letter to my lover, and returned wearing the outline of the child I had been. If I said all of that aloud, they would hear only jealousy. The crowd loosened around us. Cups needed filling, lantern wicks required trimming. Their avoidance was almost kind. When I reached the edge of the square, Ambrose Whitlock crossed beneath the last line of lights. He wore a long midnight blue coat and one ink blue leather glove. His espresso brown hair lay smooth against his collar. In lantern glow, his eyes were deep wine red, though no one else looked long enough to name the color. Barnaby Cresswell did. The Fairso steward raised his lantern, saw the antique signet on Ambrose's bare hand, and stepped out of the path. His steel blue eyes lowered. He offered no greeting. Ambrose passed him without acknowledgement. He stopped before me. A loose blue thread clung where Clementine's cuff had scraped my sleeve. Ambrose removed it with his bare fingertips. His hand was cold. A thin silver scar crossed his palm.
She learned it from me,
I said.
She did.
You saw.
I saw it.
He accepted what I had seen without calling me overwrought. or asking whether I had mistaken a common gesture for my own. For a moment, I nearly thanked him. His fingers lingered at my wrist, just above the narrow ribbon I wore there.
What are you doing in Alderbike?
I asked.
Watching.
Me?
He looked once at the crown on Clementine's head, then back at me, and left the question unanswered. He folded the blue thread into the palm of his dark glove and closed his fingers around it. I let him touch my sleeve because he was the only person in the square who did not require me to doubt my own eyes. Chapter 8. Footprints beginning beside the bed. I woke with my wrist above my head. A hand held it there. For several seconds, I could not move anything else. My body lay beneath the blanket, as if it belonged to a sleeper across the room. A pale mouth pressed to the left side of my throat. Dark hair brushed my jaw. The hand at my wrist wore leather. I saw myself in the mirror opposite the bed, nightdress crooked from one shoulder, eyes open, lips parted around a breath too weak to become sound. Wine-red eyes lifted to meet mine in the glass. Memory broke. At dawn, blood darkened the pillow. My wrist ached in the shape of fingers. 2 wet wounds sat beneath my jaw. Mother found me washing the pillowcase in cold water and tried to take it from my hands.
What happened?
You know.
Her face closed. That was answer enough. I bought flour with the last coin in my sewing purse. That evening I laid one narrow, unbroken band beneath the bedroom door and another across the floor below the barred window. I dusted the outer sill thickly enough that the warped wood disappeared beneath white. I pressed every latch, checked the nails, and tugged the iron bar until rust marked my palms. I placed Mother's small household knife beneath the blanket.
Rats?
She asked from the doorway.
Large ones.
She looked at the flower, then at my neck.
Noelle.
I'm going to bed.
I slept in intervals, counting the spaces between sounds. When I woke, the room was still dark. Fresh pain pulsed beneath my jaw. The flower at the door remained smooth. The iron bar sat in its brackets. No print crossed the band on the floor beneath the window. Then I brought the candle nearer. In the flower on the sill, 4 long finger shapes pressed inward from the outer edge and ended at the glass. 2 boot prints stood beside the bed. They began on clean floorboards. No trail joined them to door or window. Mother was awake before I called. Perhaps she had not slept. She saw the footprints and gripped her keyring until the metal cut her knuckles.
Open the cedar chest.
I said, her gaze snapped to mine.
I don't know what you mean.
Yes, you do.
She tried to stand between me and the chest. She was sturdier than I was and accustomed to winning with her body when rules failed. I put the knife on the table between us, not pointed at her, not yet.
Open it.
Mother's mouth thinned. The keys shook once before she found the right one. Beneath old winter shirts lay a child's white collar, folded around an old brown stain. I knew it before she opened the cloth. My fingers remembered the seam.
How long?
Noelle.
How long have you kept this?
Since the first morning.
The room seemed to tilt, though my body had not yet moved.
You saw him.
A face outside the glass. Pale. Wrong.
She swallowed.
Tabitha found nothing she knew. I asked you what you'd said.
And?
Mother looked at the window.
You tried to open it again.
The knife lay between us. The flower held the impossible shape of a hand.
You let me think it was only me.
I said.
My weakness. My blood. My lungs.
I thought saying it would call him.
He came anyway.
I didn't know.
You knew enough to hide this.
I knew Lux.
Her voice cracked on the word and she hated it.
I knew nails. I knew how to keep you inside. I had no money, no remedy, no book with an answer in it. I had a child bleeding into her collar and reaching for the latch.
So you took the latch for me?
I kept you alive.
You kept me ignorant.
I asked once.
You stopped asking because you were afraid.
Mother had no sentence for that. Her hand moved toward the iron bar by habit, then stopped. I took the collar. The old stain lay against my palm.
Where are you going?
To ask what you would not ask.
Her fingers caught my shawl. I pulled free. I carried the knife in one hand and the blood-marked collar in the other, and walked into Brackenmere Wood. Behind me, Mother's hand rose toward the iron bar and stopped before touching it. Chapter 9, You Are Not Invited. Brackenmere Manor had once expected guests. The front steps were broad enough for carriages, though moss had swallowed their edges. Rain entered through a split in the western roof. One wing stood dark and open to weather. 3 windows on the eastern side held candlelight behind old glass. Ambrose waited in the doorway. He wore his midnight coat buttoned high, one gloved hand resting at his side. He did not invite me in. I stopped below the threshold.
Stay there,
I said. He did. I wanted him to step forward. I wanted an excuse. I climbed the steps, pressed the childhood collar flat against his chest, and set the knife point beneath his left ribs. The cloth looked small against his coat. Ambrose looked down at it, then at me.
Have you been feeding on me?
Yes.
The plain answer struck harder than denial.
How long?
You know when it began.
I know when I became ill.
His gaze rested on my throat. I pushed the knife deeper until the fabric indented.
How did you enter a barred room?
You opened the window.
I was 7.
You told me I might come inside.
I don't remember.
You do not.
Then it wasn't permission.
It was permission you forgot.
The knife trembled. His body did not.
Locks could not stop you.
Locks do not revoke a welcome.
He said it as one might explain rain passing through a broken roof. His face did not change.
You took my life.
I kept you alive.
The words were nearly Mother's. I struck him with the collar. He caught neither my wrist nor the knife. He let both remain where I had put them, though I knew by then that he could have moved before I saw him begin.
Do not speak to me of keeping me alive.
Agnes kept you behind iron.
You came through it.
When you could not come out, the village went to Clementine.
You watched.
Percival brings you to places where no one can ask what he intends.
You watched that too?
I hated how much he had seen. I drove the knife hard enough to dimple the cloth beneath it.
Answer my question.
I said.
Why?
He did not.
What are you waiting for?
Silence. I raised the knife until the point rested over his heart.
Does this kill you?
Perhaps.
You don't sound concerned.
You have not decided to use it.
My grip tightened until the knife trembled. He remained perfectly still, close enough that I could see the subtle points of his fangs behind his sharply defined mouth. My attention caught there instead of on the blade, and I despised that he could see it.
You said I was the only one who let you in.
You were.
I was a child.
You were still the only one.
For the first time, his voice was not flat. I lowered the collar, but not the knife.
Then hear me now.
I said.
You are not invited into my mother's cottage. You are not invited into my room. You are not invited to touch me, feed from me, watch me sleep, or cross that threshold.
For the first time, his stillness tightened into concentration.
Is that what you want?
It is what I'm saying.
His eyes remained on mine. I let the childhood collar fall on the top step. Rain spread through the old brown stain. Then I stepped back from the manor threshold. He did not follow. At home, Mother stood aside when I entered. I shut the warped window, though it had not opened in years. I lifted the iron bar with both hands and set it into its brackets myself. The candle flame straightened. I watched it until my eyes hurt. That night, no hand held my wrist. No mouth found my throat. Rain passed over the cottage, and Ambrose remained a pale vertical shape beyond the barred glass until the sky began to gray. I slept. At dawn, the pillow was clean. For the first time in years, I filled my lungs without pain.
Chapter 10. The night outside the glass. I remained beneath the window until Noelle's breathing deepened. No fresh blood scented the room. I removed one glove and rested my bare hand against the wet stone below the sill. Nothing changed at the window, and I left it untested. Inside, the candle burned upright. Agnes slept in a chair beside the bed, chin on her chest, one hand still closed around her keys. Noelle's pulse moved slowly beneath the blankets. Then an interval opened between two beats, longer than a living heart should allow. The next beat came. Before dawn, clove-scented tracks crossed the road beyond the cottage and turned toward the abandoned shed. I followed only far enough to see the direction. Then I left the mud undisturbed and returned to the trees.
Chapter 11. Daylight flowers, nighttime cloves. The first morning without wounds, I stood at the washstand and unbuttoned my collar. Only the old pale marks remained beneath my jaw. No new blood crusted their edges. My wrist bore no fresh bruise. Behind me, Mother pretended to mend an apron she had already mended twice.
Did you sleep?
She asked.
Yes.
She set the needle down. Relief made her look older. I could have used that morning to ask what else she had hidden. Instead, I went to see Percival. He brought white flowers from Fairso's walled garden. They stood in a jar between us, too formal for our scarred cottage table.
I want you to tell Barnaby,
I said. Percival's hand paused over the flowers.
Tell him what?
that I exist.
His mouth softened as if I had asked for comfort.
He knows.
As a problem. Tell him I am the woman you intend to marry.
The word altered the room. Mother, listening from the kitchen, stopped moving a pot. Percival looked toward the closed door, then back to me.
Give me a week.
You've had years.
I need to speak to the household first. Barnaby has spent his life preventing surprises.
Then do not make me one.
That isn't what I meant.
It is always what you mean when you ask for time.
He took my hand. His thumb moved over the healed line in my palm, searching for a wound that was no longer there.
1 week.
I agreed. I told myself he could manage 1 week. Later, Clementine came to collect a dress Mother had asked her to alter. Her sewing basket sat open on the table. Dark spools, chalk, scissors, folded measuring tape. Percival's silver cravat pin lay among them. I recognized the slim engraved head. I had traced it with my thumb in the glass house while he kissed my throat. Clementine saw me looking.
Estate linen.
She said.
It caught in a cuff.
I picked it up. Clove soap lingered on the metal. That evening, Percival visited wearing a different pin. When he removed his glove, his thumb covered the pale mark at his throat where the silver one usually sat. I smiled. I poured him tea. I asked after Fairso's tenant roofs and listened with the gracious attention Clementine had spent years learning from me. His shoulders loosened. He set one glove beside the cup and stopped covering the pale mark where the silver pin usually sat. Clementine's borrowed shawl hung near the stove. She had left it after bringing Mother thread. Clove scented one corner.
You're quiet.
Percival said.
I'm listening.
To what?
I heard his pulse before I found an answer. It quickened under his collar. I set down my cup. When he left, he took the wooded path instead of the estate road. I waited until the cottage light could no longer reach him. Then I wrapped my lavender gray shawl tightly, pocketed the silver pin, and followed. My body tired. That remained true. Mud pulled at my repaired boots, and twice I had to brace against a tree while my lungs worked through their old grievance. But the woods had changed. I heard a vole beneath wet leaves, water moving under stones, Percival's steps far ahead, clove soap where his coat brushed branches. Then a woman laughed. The sound was distant and perfectly clear. My laugh. The path ended at the abandoned shed. I took the silver pin from my pocket and held it until the engraved head bit my palm. Inside, the workbench scraped. Chapter 12, The Better Body. The hairpin in the straw had one rich brown strand wound around it. I left it where it lay. Through the boards, Clementine said,
Look at me.
Percival answered too softly. She struck the workbench with her hand.
Not when I'm useful. Not when I carry her letters. Now.
Noelle has nothing to do with this.
You called me by her name.
I apologized.
You stopped looking at me.
Cloth shifted, the lantern smoked. I pressed my palm to the same wet boards and listened.
You wanted me back.
Clementine said.
Say which of us you want when you don't have to be careful.
Don't do this.
Say it.
Silence stretched. Clementine let it, and at last Percival answered.
With you.
He said.
I don't have to stop.
Clementine's breath caught.
So I'm better.
Yes, Clementine. By the gods, your body.
The word was quiet. My hand slid on the wet boards. I saw Percival's relief behind the citrus leaves, his foot striking the cottage floor beyond my reach, his careful hands wrapping my palm after my body stopped him. I saw Clementine wearing my childhood blue while Hester lowered the crown. I saw Mother's keys. He meant Clementine did not make him stop. She did not make him afraid. Clementine laughed. She used the softened cadence I had taught her when we were children, the one meant to reassure a shy customer that she had said the right thing. My breath began to fail. I did not leave. In the wood behind me, rain moved through bare branches without touching one particular patch of ground.
Lord Whitlock.
I said. I could not make myself say his name. The title came out first. His gloved hand settled on the frame beside my shoulder.
You called.
I turned. Ambrose stood close enough that rain shone on his collarbone-length hair, but had not disturbed it. He had been there before I spoke. I knew that with the same certainty with which I knew what was happening inside.
How long?
I whispered. He looked at the shed door.
Before you reached it.
You knew.
I knew.
Why didn't you tell me?
His eyes moved to the boards. Inside, Percival murmured Clementine's name. Ambrose said nothing. My heart beat once, hard enough to hurt. Then it waited. Rain ticked through the branches. My next heartbeat came late. The wounds at my throat tightened. Heat moved beneath the skin, sharp and clean, and the tenderness vanished. Sound opened around me. I heard Clementine's fast pulse through the wall, Percival's slower one beneath it. I heard water slipping from Ambrose's coat hem, and a moth battering itself against the lantern glass inside. My hands remained cold, but the need for warmth had vanished. I looked down. The silver pin had cut my palm. The line closed while I watched. My breath came easily. Inside the shed, Percival said something tender to Clementine. I waited for my knees to give. They did not. That frightened me more. Ambrose reached toward me. I stepped away before he touched me. He let his hand fall. I walked back through the rain without confronting either of them. Behind me, 2 hearts continued beating in the shed. My next beat did not come until I was halfway down the path. Chapter 13, The Cold Leaves Her. I reached Alderwick without once stopping for breath. Rain soaked my fine blonde hair until it clung down my back. My faded shawl grew heavy enough to drag at my shoulders. I did not shiver. Cottage walls no longer muffled life. I heard a baby crying 3 houses away, a husband whispering to his wife that the storm would ruin the roof patch, Hester pacing before her own hearth. Every pulse struck the village with its private rhythm. Mother opened the door before I knocked.
Noelle?
She pulled me beneath the lamp. I knew what she saw, the gray cast reduced, my posture upright without effort, my blue eyes sharpened around a narrow burgundy ring neither of us had seen before.
You're soaked.
I know.
She touched my cheek and snatched her fingers back at the cold. Then she pressed 2 fingers to my wrist. 1 second passed. 2. Her thumb shifted, searching. A beat arrived so late that her face changed before she found it. I pulled away and changed my wet clothes without sitting. I bent to unlace my boots and rose without dizziness. The full wash basin had always required 2 careful trips. I carried it from the hearth to the bedroom in one hand. When I wrung out my shawl, the joints in my fingers did not ache. I crossed the room twice, then a 3rd time, waiting for the old pressure beneath my breastbone. Nothing came. The rain had cleared my chest. The burgundy at my eyes belonged to the lamp. The voices beyond the walls carried because the storm pressed everyone indoors. I gave each change an ordinary cause before Mother could name a worse one. Broth waited on the table. I drank because she watched. It tasted like warm ash. I swallowed once and set the bowl down.
You need Tabitha.
Mother said.
No.
You walked all that way in this weather?
And returned.
Your skin is cold, and I can scarcely find your pulse.
I'm better.
The word came out before I had tested it. I held to it because my lungs were full and my hands steady. Mother reached for her key ring.
I'm fetching Tabitha.
You'll bring half the village back with her.
Then they may all watch you breathe.
Her pulse moved visibly in her throat. My mouth hurt with a small, shameful pleasure before I understood why. I stepped back so fast the chair struck the wall. Mother caught up her cloak.
What is it?
Nothing.
She left despite me. Her boots struck the lane, the keys beating against her skirt. Outside, a figure stood beyond the barred window. Ambrose had followed at a distance. He waited in the rain with his hands at his sides and did not ask to enter. Ambrose stayed outside the window. He did not touch the latch. He did not tell me to open it. I distrusted that. I wanted to believe it anyway. I placed both hands on the iron bar. Before I lifted it, the candle flame bent inward. Chapter 14, The Window She Opens Again. The bar was heavier than I remembered, even with strength back in my arms. I lifted it from its brackets and laid it on the floor. Mother had gone to fetch Tabitha despite my refusal. I heard her boots halfway down the lane and the key ring striking her skirt. We did not have long. I opened the casement. Ambrose remained outside. Rain silvered the shoulders of his midnight blue coat. His face held no plea. He could have been carved for the ruined manor and moved here only because the forest had grown tired of him.
Come in.
I said. He did not move. Anger rose at once.
You heard me.
I heard you.
Then why are you standing there?
You told me I was not invited.
I am telling you otherwise now.
His gaze dropped briefly to my hand on the open frame.
Tell me what you want.
I reached through the window, caught the front of his coat, and pulled. He crossed the threshold without touching the sill. The room changed around his height. Our cottage ceiling had never seemed low until Ambrose stood beneath it. I took off his ink blue glove. His fingers were cold and long, the silver scar across his palm, bright against porcelain skin.
Put your hand here.
Why?
I pressed his bare palm over my ribs, where Percival's hand had always changed from desire to caution. I did not answer. I dragged his hand lower and kept it there. Ambrose's fingers spread. He watched my face. Not my ribs, not my breath. My grip tightened on his coat. I kissed him first. His mouth was colder than the rain. He answered without surprise. One hand remained over my ribs, while the other removed the pale wooden comb from my hair. Fine blonde waves fell down my back. He unfastened my high collar. The last time he had touched that place, I had been pinned in sleep. I remembered the leather around my wrist and blood on the pillow. My hand tightened in his coat. I pulled it open and found the buttons of his high-collared shirt. He lowered me to the bed without Percival's careful hesitation. Keeping me where he wanted required no effort. My grip tightened on his shirt. My dress loosened beneath his hands. I pushed his coat from his shoulders. He removed my shift and stockings in unhurried stages, watching my face as each piece joined the high collar on the floor. I did not reach for the sheet. He was not watching my breathing.
Still breathing?
I asked, his sharply defined mouth curved by less than a smile.
You are.
Disappointed?
No.
I drew him between my knees. The bed frame remained steady beneath my grip. My lungs filled and emptied. Ambrose's cold palm stayed over my ribs. As our bodies joined, his weight controlled but unmistakable, his attention never loosening into alarm. He was stronger than Percival, stronger than any living man I had known. When my hands tightened at his shoulders, I understood he could have caught both wrists in one hand. If I told him to stop and he refused, I could not force him off. My fingers tightened. I kept my hands on his shoulders. His mouth moved from mine to my throat. Fangs touched the old marks. My body froze before my mind found language.
Wait.
Ambrose stopped with his palm still over my ribs. His mouth stayed near my pulse, his body motionless, while he waited for me to move.
I'm waiting,
he said. My heart gave one slow beat beneath his palm.
Do you pity me?
No.
Did you make me ill?
Silence. The clean pillow after I barred him came back to me. I flattened my hand against his chest and pushed once. He moved back. I kept my hand between us. I turned my head and exposed the left side of my neck. Ambrose remained still. I caught his hair at the nape and pulled him down. His fangs entered with a bright, narrow pain. I was awake, the window open behind him and my own hand locked in his hair. Relief came so sharply my fingers tightened at his nape. Percival had flinched from the coughing and the weakness. Ambrose had caused much of it, I knew that. I pulled him closer anyway. He did not lift his head. I did not ask him to. Blood warmed his mouth. My breathing stayed even. The bite hurt. Then the old ache in my chest eased. When he lifted his head, red darkened his lower lip. I touched it with my thumb.
You knew I wouldn't die.
I knew.
What am I?
He kissed the inside of my wrist and left the question unanswered. By morning, one dark glove lay beneath the bed. My high collar was crumpled beside the bowl of cold broth. Blood stained one side of the pillow. I sat up without dizziness. Ambrose watched me raise a spoonful of broth to my mouth. Ash. I set it down. He said nothing.
Chapter 15. What he covers before dawn. Noel fell asleep with one hand spread over the place where her heart moved too slowly. I retrieved my glove from beneath the bed. Sunrise entered through a gap in the curtain and crossed her exposed wrist. The skin reddened at once. A welt rose, then a blister. She did not wake before I pulled the curtain shut. I wrapped her wrist in linen, cooled at the basin. The iron bar lay on the floor near the bed. I moved it farther away, close enough that she would not call it removed. I did not tell her food would taste wrong now. I did not tell her sunlight would burn. Her wrapped hand rested on her chest between two slow beats. Agnes' key struck the outer lock while she was still in the lane. I crossed the open casement before she entered the passage. From the trees, I heard her say Noel's name once, heard the iron scrape back into its brackets, and then heard the cottage door close again when she went for Tabitha.
Chapter 16. The Message in the Fire. I woke to the scrape of iron entering its brackets. Mother stood at the window with both hands on the bar. Ambrose was gone. She had folded my high collar and placed it beside the bowl of broth, turned the blood-marked side of the pillow toward the wall, and left his dark glove nowhere she might have had to name it. Her eyes kept returning to the narrow burgundy ring around mine. The linen around my wrist had shifted in sleep. A blade of sunlight found the exposed edge. Pain opened the blister before I could move. Mother dragged the curtain closed and plunged my arm into the wash basin.
What happened?
She asked.
The sun.
I can see that.
Her grip tightened.
Who wrapped this?
I looked at the iron bar. Mother followed my gaze.
I found it on the floor.
He left before you returned.
Her mouth went flat. She covered my wrist with fresh linen, then sent a neighbor's boy for Tabitha despite my refusal. I heard the boy's pulse through the wall until he reached the lane. Mother begged me to remain until daylight passed. Her own heartbeat was closer. The sound made my mouth hurt.
I can care for you,
she said. Her care meant broth I could not swallow, Tabitha asking questions, and Mother locking the bar again if she was afraid enough. I had been ill in that room too long. At dusk, Ambrose waited at the gate. I held up the bandaged wrist.
You knew sunlight would do this.
I know.
You could have warned me.
I could have.
He met each accusation with the bare fact, then turned to practical things. Shuttered rooms, water for the burn, silence when the bells hurt my ears, and animal blood warmed enough not to revolt me. I chose Brackenmere Manor. The first cup of blood tasted like iron and winter meat. I hated the relief before I finished it. My hands stopped shaking. The pain behind my teeth eased. Ambrose took the empty cup and filled it again.
Where did it come from?
A row taken near the north wall.
You killed it?
I did.
I drank anyway. For 6 nights, a pattern formed. I returned to the cottage after sunset, then left before dawn because the sky, hunger, and other people's bodies had become clocks I could not ignore. On the 3rd night, I tried to remain through the alderwick bells. Mother sat opposite me with her keys on the table and a fresh bowl of broth between us. The first bronze stroke rang. Every pulse in the lane leapt against my hearing. At the 3rd, the spoon bent between my fingers. Mother reached across the table. I heard the blood move into her hand and left before she touched me. Ambrose met me beneath Brackenmere's broken arch. He shut the inner doors and pressed cool cloth over my ears until the bells receded. A cup waited beside the bed. By then I knew which shutters had to remain closed and how long the path to the cottage took before sunrise. Mother's iron bar had always announced itself. At Brackenmere, I learned to close the eastward curtains before dawn. I stayed because inside those rooms I could cross the floor without losing breath. I could stand before Ambrose without watching his attention change into alarm. I could drink what my body required and feel shame only after the need had quieted. On the 6th evening, Hester caught me at the cottage gate. She wore a powder blue shawl and no lantern crown. Her freckled face looked smaller without festival light.
Noelle?
I almost kept walking. She held out a sealed letter.
Percival asked me to bring this, not leave it. Bring it to you.
Why you?
Because you might shut the door on an estate servant.
I might shut it on you.
Her wide mouth tightened.
He asked that you be at the Fair Southeast Gate at noon tomorrow.
Noon, Hester saw me glance toward the sky, though sunset had already passed.
I'm sorry,
she said.
For which part?
She had several to choose from. Her eyes lowered. I took the letter. It remained unopened inside my cloak as I returned to Brackenmere. Daylight pain had begun early, a deep burning under the half-healed wrist. I dropped the cloak beside Ambrose's desk, while he closed the shutters and wrapped my arm. The letter slipped enough for the seal to show. His gaze found the seal. Neither of us mentioned it. When the pain passed, I left the cloak where it had fallen. The next night I found the envelope beneath an estate map. The seal was unbroken. Ambrose stood near the fireplace, one gloved hand resting on the mantel.
Why didn't you give it to me?
He came looking when you could stand.
The answer was so exact in its cruelty that I almost admired it.
I moved a letter.
You hid it.
I did.
He left Percival's worth and his own motives unspoken. The hidden letter lay between us while he waited to learn what I would do.
Give it back.
He lifted the map and placed the letter in my hand. I broke the seal. The first sentence was written in Percival's careful slant.
Meet me at the east gate at noon. I will tell the steward you are the woman I meant to marry.
I read it aloud once. A week earlier I would have gone. Now he chose noon. I did not read the rest.
The next letter.
I told Ambrose.
You hand to me immediately.
And this one?
I held it over the fire.
Burn it.
He took the pages. Flame caught Percival's name, then the edge of the promise. I watched the east gate blacken into a curled strip. When the paper broke apart, I let the last pieces fall into the grate. At Ambrose's desk, beneath maps of the estate and the connecting roads, I placed the recovered silver pin between 2 blank sheets. I wrote to Percival first. I told him to meet me at the abandoned shed before dawn. I promised privacy. I promised I would not stop him this time. The second note was for Clementine. I chose a later hour and wording that would bring her quickly enough to see what I intended.
Why send for Clementine?
Ambrose asked. I pressed the seal until wax spread around my thumb.
So she sees him with me.
And if he comes...
Then she can ask him why.
Ambrose regarded the sealed notes.
And afterward?
I pressed the second fold flat.
You will remain outside the shed. You enter only if I call or if someone prevents me from leaving.
As you wish.
I am not
asking you to kill him.
All right.
I carried the notes myself. At Fairso's lower gate, the night groom accepted Percival's after I named the heir and showed the seal. Clementine's workroom was dark, but lamplight showed beneath the door. I pushed her note through the gap and heard a chair scrape inside before I reached the lane. When I returned to Brackenmere, Percival's remaining pages had collapsed in the grate. The second sealed note was no longer in my hand, and the last corner of his public promise turned to ash. Chapter 17, The Same Workbench. Pre-dawn thinned the sky behind the broken boards. I reached the shed first. The workbench still bore the pale grooves of old tools, and one darker mark where rain had entered through the roof for years. I placed Percival's silver pin in the center of it. Through a gap beside the door, I saw Ambrose take his position outside. His long coat became part of the trees. One ink blue glove rested against the outer frame exactly where it had rested the night I heard the comparison. He had obeyed my instruction, yet the sight of his glove on the frame tightened my stomach. Percival arrived alone. His boots were wet to the ankle. His pale blue neckcloth had been tied badly, as if he had dressed without a mirror. When he saw me standing beside the workbench, hope crossed his face before caution could hide it.
Noel.
His gaze moved over me, the restored strength, the stillness, the faint burgundy ring around my eyes, the throat no longer bruised by old wounds. His breath changed. I had wanted that look. Seeing it still made my fingers close around the workbench.
You received my letter,
he said.
I received it late.
His expression altered.
Whitlock.
You know him?
I know the name. I saw him near your cottage.
You have seen him before.
Not like this.
I touched the silver pin.
Why did you keep visiting me?
Percival looked at it and understood.
Noel, let me explain.
Then do it without asking me to wait again.
He drew a slow breath.
I loved you.
Did?
Do.
Then why her?
Rain tapped weakly against the roof. He rubbed his thumb over the place the pin should have been.
With Clementine, I wasn't afraid every time I touched her.
Outside the shed, his cruelty had been plain. Here he sounded almost honest, and I wished he had lied.
You were afraid I would die?
Every time.
So you lied to me while finding someone who let you forget.
I was weak.
You were comfortable.
I wrote to you.
When I could stand.
His gaze dropped to the straw. He let the accusation stand.
I meant what I wrote.
He said.
Come to the east gate after sunrise. Barnaby will hear it from me.
The sun is inconvenient now.
He frowned. I stepped close and untied his neckcloth. His breath changed.
Noel.
You came because I said there would be no stopping.
I came because I fought.
That I had forgiven you?
His hands settled at my waist. He tried to withdraw them. I kissed him before he managed it. For one moment he felt familiar. He was warm, alive. I opened his shirt against the same workbench where I had heard him say he did not have to stop. He answered at once, pulling me closer with an urgency he had always restrained around my frailty. His pulse struck beneath his skin, audible a moment before the scent of blood reached me. The sound filled the shed. Hunger rose so quickly that I forgot Clementine, the note, and every sentence I had prepared. I kissed his throat. My teeth broke the skin. Percival cried out and struck the workbench with both hands. The silver pin jumped in place. I drove him back with strength neither of us understood. His body, once so easy and capable beside mine, could not move me an inch.
Noel, stop.
I did. For one moment, I lifted my mouth. Blood ran beneath his collar. His pulse struggled under my lips, fast and uneven. I could have stepped away. Percival turned his head toward the open door.
Look at him.
Ambrose stood with his gloved hand on the frame. He was not surprised Percival saw it. So did I. The hand on the wood did not move.
He was waiting.
Percival whispered. Even pinned beneath me, he was still looking for someone else to blame.
Be quiet.
Noelle, look at...
I closed my mouth over the wound again. Nothing in me failed. My hands were steady. That made it harder to stop. I did not stop a second time.
Chapter 18. The better body falls still. Noel drained Percival past saving. I did not intervene. His hand found the silver pin once, failed to close around it, and fell into the straw. His open shirt caught on the workbench edge. Blood darkened the wood where Noel had intended only to stage a choice. She lifted her head and met my eyes. She did not ask what I would do. She had told me to stand outside the shed. I had stood there. Percival had wronged her. At the end, he had begged her to stop. I had watched Noel kill him anyway. At the edge of the wood, a fair-so stable lantern paused beside Percival's tethered horse, then wheeled toward the estate. Clementine arrived before his body settled. She filled the doorway, brown hair pinned beneath a plain comb, dress hem damp from the path. Her blue eyes moved from Noel to Percival and then to the blood. She did not scream first. She dropped beside him.
Percival?
Clementine tore a strip from the hem of her dress and pressed it to his throat. Blood soaked through immediately. She called his name again, harder, as if volume might compel the body to resume its work. Noelle stood over them with blood at her mouth. When Clementine found no pulse, she pressed the torn hem to his throat again, harder. Then she saw the silver pin in the straw. She seized it in both hands and lunged. Noelle caught her wrist before the point touched skin. Clementine's pulse beat fast enough for both of them to hear.
Why? Because you couldn't leave him to me?
Clementine said. Her voice broke.
Monster!
Noelle looked at her throat. Then she turned Clementine's fist palm up, folded her fingers around the blood-wet pin, and released her. Clementine staggered back. Noel left her alive beside Percival with the torn hem, the useless bandage, and the pin closed in her hand. Clementine screamed then, calling beyond us for help. Her voice met lanterns already moving along the estate road. Barnaby Cresswell called orders, and servants spread between the trees. Noel lifted her head. Of all the human pulses in the dark, Agnes Fenwick's was the clearest to her. She turned toward the cottage. I followed without praise. Behind us, the first estate lantern reached the shed door.
Chapter 19. The pulse at my mother's throat. Blood cooled at the corner of my mouth before I reached home. Barnaby's lanterns moved behind me through the wood, cutting between trunks. I reached the cottage window before the search reached the lane. The iron bar was in place. I put one hand on the same warped frame Ambrose had crossed for years. Nothing opened for me. I could not enter unless Mother let me in. Mother appeared behind the glass. She saw the blood, her gray-green eyes fixed on my face, then on the lanterns climbing the road.
Noelle?
I put one hand on the sill.
Open it.
Her hands closed around the bar. For 1 second, I thought she would bar it again. Barnaby's lantern appeared at the gate. Mother lifted the iron. A splinter drove into her palm as she lowered the bar to the floor. Blood welled across her chapped skin. She ignored it, pushed the casement wide, and caught both my wrists. I climbed through. The room smelled of cold broth, lamp oil, and blood.
Wipe your mouth,
she said. There was no time. Barnaby struck the front door with the head of his cane.
Mrs. Fenwick, open in the name of Fairsall Estate.
Mother took one look at me, then stepped into the passage and shut the bedroom door behind her. I heard the outer lock turn. Barnaby entered with 2 servants. His voice remained formal, but grief had roughened it.
Where is your daughter?
Mother stood between them and the room where Percival's blood marked my dress.
She came through here,
Barnaby said.
The trail reaches your yard.
She ran on.
Which way?
Mother's bleeding hand pressed against the doorframe.
The mill stream.
Silence. Barnaby had spent his life hearing bad accounts. I could almost feel him measuring hers.
Why would she go there?
She knows the low bank. The floodgate is open after the rain. If she tries the willow crossing, she'll lose her footing.
One servant shifted toward the bedroom. Mother held up her bleeding palm.
She climbed through the window. This is mine.
The servant looked to Barnaby. From the yard, another man called that Percival's horse had been found tethered on the Brackenmere Road. Barnaby's keys struck his coat as he turned.
Search the stream first. Both banks. We return here after.
Lanterns withdrew from the cottage and hurried away from Brackenmere Wood. Mother waited until the last footstep left the yard. Then she opened the bedroom door. The blood in her palm had run to her wrist.
You lied,
I said.
You are my daughter.
to Barnaby.
Yes.
They may punish you.
I am aware.
Her pulse beat in the hollow of her throat. I could not stop hearing it. I crossed the distance before she could raise her hand. My mouth touched her skin. Mother went rigid, but she did not pull away. Once she had pressed 2 fingers to my weak wrist and counted. I bit her. 1. Her blood was warm. I smelled her soap, the broth, and the iron of her keys. 2. Mother's bleeding palm remained on the open casement.
I thought I was keeping you alive,
she said, my fangs pressed harder.
It was still locked.
I know.
3. Cold broth waited on the table with the skin across its surface. Her keyring lay beside it instead of at her waist. Blood from her palm ran over the sill she had opened for me. I stopped before I could take another swallow. Mother's hand rose to my face. She touched the dried blood at my mouth as if I were still 7 and feverish.
Stay until morning.
Sunlight would burn me. Barnaby would return. I looked at the iron bar on the floor.
No.
Noelle.
I stepped over it. Outside the household light, Ambrose waited among the trees with his ink-blue glove at his side. He gave no command and did not reach for me. I crossed the space and placed my hand in his. Mother's pulse continued behind me, while the misdirected lanterns faded toward the mill stream.
Chapter 20. The Hand She Takes. The iron bar remained on the cottage floor. Agnes left the window open. Noel placed her cold hand in mine without being asked. My ink-blue glove closed around it. We entered Brackenmere Wood at blue dawn. She listened for her mother's heartbeat until it was too far off to hear. In the cottage window behind us, a candle flame bent outward toward the path.
I hope I kept you company with my story. It would mean so much for you to like and subscribe because it helps me make more. I'll see you in the next one.